Thanks, Lynn. Welcome, everybody. I'm sure we've got the usual mix of people that have been to one or many of these sessions and others that are brand new. The Future Teacher Project started in 2017, I think it was, and this resource here that we'll put the link in the text chat on more than one occasion today, I'm sure. We have all the previous talks and all the previous recordings. There were 19 topics previously. If we look at just one of them, the first one that we did back in 2017, that was just under the banner of the Future Teacher Project. And then we ran Future Teacher Reactivated, I think, and then Future Teacher Reflected. And now today we have Future Teacher Reborn. That's how kind of we've tried to come up with a theme of these that's relevant. And there's a little on this page where you'll find these reborn sessions as we progress through the months. There's a bit of a summary there that we are now 7 years old, our principles, about us, and about our next phase. So you can read all that in your own time. On this page, which is where you would have visited to register, you'll find the registration form for this session. We leave it there because people turn up late and join late on the day, but that will disappear at about 2 o'clock today. And then I think at 1:30, the registration for the next session will appear here. So before you leave the session, if you refresh the page, if you're viewing this, you'll be able to register for the next session, but we'll talk about that later. You'll find this welcome panel. If I expand all the tabs here, it's just a welcome and then information about our guest speakers today. So they will introduce themselves or be introduced and talk through that. We have some social media links and a presentation link there, and then a list of what next. And before we finish the session, we'll remind you about those what next steps. The other thing that we usually do is introduce you to what everybody said they most want to learn from these sessions and this session today. And I think, Sian, you were going to talk about that.
Sorry, I'm starting to talk when my microphone's on mute. People wanted to know about kind of proactive digital skills support, sharing strategies for developing skills, including how libraries contribute, identifying and addressing skills, explaining how maybe institutes assess students' digital needs and how to collaborate to fill at gaps, embedding digital skills in the curriculum, STEM digital skills, that was mentioned as well, discussing approaches for promoting and enhancing digital skills amongst STEM students. They wanted to know about platforms and maybe about some responsible use of AI to enhance learning. So this is the feedback that people have given when they register. Supporting online learning and assessment, and also how to engage the student voice. So that's kind of a summary of the feedback. A lot of people said they just wanted to come and listen as well. So that's the feedback that we had. So some of the specific feedback here. Okay. Is that okay? Sorry, I can't hear you. Lillian's on mute.
Yeah, and I think, Sian, you're going to introduce Fionn next.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm going to introduce Fionn Simcox from the School of Healthcare Sciences in Bangor University, who's going to talk about preparing students for academic study and digital skills through an online course that was created at Bangor. Yes, Fionn. Deal. Thanks, Fionn. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. So hopefully you can see my slides. So I'm Fionn Simcox. I'm a senior lecturer at Bangor University in North Wales, and just thank you for this opportunity to share our experiences with you of us trying to prepare a particular group of postgraduate students for all the skills required for studying at master's level. So I run MSc Pathway in Advanced Clinical Practice, and I'm also the lead of the prescribing courses here at Bangor. And these courses that we have tend to have very non-traditional learners with their own particular sets of considerations. So they're a much more diverse cohort than traditional undergraduate students, but generally speaking, they are older. So for example, on one of the courses I'm running at the moment, the average age is 42. And what we have to consider is that the course and the skills they need to complete the course successfully might not be the most important thing in their lives. So they might have young families, they might have child care duties, they might have caring responsibilities for elderly parents and so on. They are studying on a part-time basis because they are working full-time as healthcare practitioners. So these are nurses, paramedics, physiotherapists, pharmacists, and they all have, as you can appreciate, very demanding jobs. And what you might not consider is that these people in these roles in the NHS don't particularly need a level of digital literacy to perform their job effectively. So a nurse working on a ward, for example, won't even need to email as part of their day-to-day job. Most of them will not have studied at master's level before, and a lot of them will have studied at level 6, but a long time ago. And so what that means is that maybe they were 10, 15, maybe 20 years since their last period of study. And when they last studied, this was about as high tech as things got. So they've got a lot to learn. So everything is new for them. And finally, our courses are clinical courses. So what this means is not only do they have to be released from work to study academically and attend campus 1 day a week, they also have to fit in time to achieve clinical competencies through completing hours in a placement. So what all of this means is that they don't really have spare time to fit anything else in. So we don't have time in the timetable to fit in digital skills, for example. So to give you some examples of level of digital literacy amongst the cohorts, students sometimes, I had an example last year of, well, this happens every year actually, they have a portfolio which is probably 10, 12 pages of a document that they have to complete. And then when I ask them to send that to me, sometimes I get a series of 5, 6, 7 emails from the same student. And each email has 10, 12 attachments of a photograph of each page, for example. So not knowing how to scan a document and send it in an email. Another example, a student wanting me to look at a draft of their essay, and the essay was embedded in the body of the email. And when I asked, can you send it as an attachment in a Word document, they didn't know how to do that. So the level of digital literacy amongst this particular cohort can vary, but can be quite low, and it causes them a lot of problems during their courses. So we recognised that we needed to prepare students for all aspects of studying at level 7, not just the academic skills that they were traditionally associated with a master's course, but also giving them tips and advice about how to manage work and studying at the same time, and as well the digital skills that they would need to be able to study successfully and complete their course. So like I mentioned, we don't have time to address this once they've started their courses. So we needed to preload them, if you like, so that once they started their studies with us, they could hit the floor running. So we asked previous students what their opinions were. So we had our opinions, we had our thoughts, but it was really important to hear the thoughts and opinions of our students. So we asked students who are currently on the courses Did they appreciate the amount of work and level involved on their level 7 course? A third said they fully appreciated it. 45% said, well, maybe a little bit. And just about a quarter of them said that they had significantly underappreciated what was involved. We then asked them, if you had had the opportunity to undertake a course to prepare you for academic study before you started your actual studies with us, would you have taken that offer? About a quarter said, yes, absolutely. 34% maybe, and surprisingly, 14% no, they wouldn't. So we then asked them, well, what would you want us to include in this course if we were to develop one? And as you can see, they concentrated mostly on the traditional skills one would associate with completing a level 7 course. So the academic skills, referencing, critical writing, and so on. But 2 did identify they would have appreciated guidance on navigating Blackboard, which is the university's learning management system. So even though we had addressed that there was work to be done in increasing the digital skills of some students, the students themselves didn't really acknowledge this. So it's a skill that is often overlooked by students. They don't realise that a specific level of digital proficiency is needed when undertaking academic study. So we developed a self-paced distance learning short course to address all the skills required to succeed at master's level study. And we addressed digital skills in 3 different ways. So first of all, we addressed it directly through a dedicated learning unit. You can see there, learning unit 2, digital skills. So in here, we included a combination of text and 2 to 3 minute videos with screen capture to demonstrate the different tools. So we covered things like Blackboard, Turnitin, Panopto, Blackboard Ally, and all of these things. So with all of these tools, we went through what they are, how they can use it, how they can access it, but more importantly, why they should use it. What are the benefits of accessing these digital tools? The second way was that we highlighted, how developing digital skills can allow them to access resources that will make things easier for them during their studies. So our courses are quite challenging, so we needed to let them know how a certain level of proficiency in digital skills can enhance their learning. So we mentioned things like note-taking apps, reference management tools, text-to-speech programs, study apps, like Chegg Prep, which gives flashcards for study revision and so on. We asked them to self-assess where they were at before they started their studies. So not just in academic skills, but also in digital skills, and for them to identify how they could develop their skills in this area. And then the third way is we wanted them to learn by doing. So rather than give them a load of information, we wanted them to put it in practice. So it's important for us that this Prepare for Academic Study course was on Blackboard, because that is the site that they will use once they start their studies with us. So we laid out the resources into files or learning units in exactly the same way as we would once they start their course with us. So by working their way through the course, they should then become familiar with Blackboard, how to navigate Blackboard, so that they should be confident in doing so once they start their studies with us. So it's one less thing to worry about. We considered the platforms and tools used in the courses that they would undertake, so in the advanced practice course and in the prescribing courses, and we tried to incorporate as many of them into the course as much as possible. So we asked them to download a document, for example, by clicking on a link. And the first time we asked them to do that, we showed them how to do it and gave them a screenshot of how to do it. So we asked them to submit into a discussion board on Blackboard. We delivered some of the resources through a Microsoft Sway, some through a recording. We asked them to complete a quiz on Blackboard so that they get used to using these digital tools that would be used once they start their course with us. So we only ran the course in August, so in very, very early days. But we're already thinking about what we can improve and what was done well. So on the positives to begin with, we co-developed the course with the teaching and learning support team and the digital services team at Bangor. So we made sure that we had all the expertise we needed. We developed the course to meet the needs of our cohort group. So we went out and asked them, what do you want us to cover? And we had the student voice all throughout the Prepare for Academic study course. We asked them their opinions. We asked them for tips for future students, and they did give actually some fantastic tips for how students can enhance their learning whilst they're on their courses. It's important that they got familiar with Blackboard, because when you're studying, particularly when you're thinking about digital tools and resources, consistency is important. And the course is available to them however long they're on their studies with us, so they can always pop back into it. What's not so good is that we were probably quite late releasing it. So it's probably about 3 weeks before they actually started the course, and maybe we needed to do that sooner. Because they're undertaking this preparation course when they're not registered with the university, there are certain things they can't do. So they can't access the library and use the digital resources in the library to do a literature search, for example. We can only talk about how they do it. They can't practice it. And I am thinking that maybe there was a bit of information overload. Did we just chuck everything at them and hoping that they take some of it on board? But looking to the future, we are going to evaluate the course. So the students did the course in August. They started their studies in September. So they will submit their first assignments in November, December time. So once they've done that and received their feedback, we will formally evaluate their course and ask their opinions. Well, as I mentioned, probably release it a bit sooner, but then it's a balance of releasing it too soon and they think, oh, I don't need to think about now. So that might be something we need to think about. We need to incorporate more doing into the course. So things like download this document, use Ally to download this document as an MP3 audio format, or watch this Panopto but slow it down so you can highlight the important bits and so on. They can use to grasp the difficult concepts. And hopefully we can share it across the school. So the aim of the course was to remove the fear of the digital skills, so to make it a safe space to practice. To have digitally competent students, so when they are starting their studies with us, they can concentrate on learning about advanced practice or prescribing and not have to worry about digital skills. And also we wanted to give them the skills so that they can maximise their learning opportunities and get most out of their studies. So I'm really interested to see how others approach this. How do you prepare your students for the digital skills involved in academic study? And do students recognise that this is a need, that a certain level of proficiency in digital skills is needed? I think that's fantastic timing. I've only got 6 seconds left. But I've also got one of my students on one of my courses who's very kindly agreed to come and give her perspective and her opinions and her experience of the course. So Vicky, are you there?
I am indeed. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Hello.
Right.
Sorry, I can't switch my camera on because I'm in a clinical area, so apologies. I can't switch on. But I would like to thank you for creating this course, Fionn, because as a mature student going back into study, even though I hadn't had as long a break as perhaps some of my colleagues have, it is very, very daunting, the digital era, because when I qualified as a nurse in 2003, our assignments could be given handwritten. There was no Turnitin, there was there wasn't, and the overhead projectors were commonplace. So it really is incredibly daunting to take up postgraduate study and grasp the things that I suppose millennials take for granted. Yeah, but I mean, I was very grateful for the digital portion. The live videos were really, really useful because I'm a visual learner. So having the library team talking through the process and clicking in a stepwise fashion and talking me through the process, I felt was really, really valuable. What I would have liked to have done, but you've already alluded to that, was to have a go, which I couldn't do until I was on the course.
Yes, that is something that we need to look into. Yeah. Is there anything else, do you think, Victoria, that we should have included that we didn't?
At the moment, I can't think that there is, but I'm sure as I go on in my studies, I will perhaps feel that, oh, this would have been useful to know about in September rather than in June, perhaps.
Yeah, right. Well, if you do, let me know.
Indeed.
Diolch, Victoria.
Croeso.
Well, thank you very much, Fionn, and that's lovely, Victoria. Thank you very much for coming along and sharing your feedback on that. And this is what we want to do in the Future Teacher, to kind of actually have feedback on the practices that we're recommending to people and ensuring that we're actually recommending things that are rooted in real results. So thank you very much for that. It's my honor to introduce to you Dr. Gillian Terry and Jenny Brown from the LSE. Gillian is an academic director, professor, associate professor for education, co-director of the LSE, and Jenny works in the Digital Skills Lab. She's the head of the Digital Skills Lab there. So they've done this collaborative work to embed digital skills in an interdisciplinary social science curriculum. And the reason why they're here is partly because what they shared, is it about feels like 6 years ago, 4 to 6 years ago, stayed with me all this time until this webinar came up, and I was like, I know who I want to invite. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Jenny and Gillian for their 15 minutes to tell you what they've been up to and a little bit of what they've been doing since you did that last presentation as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lillian, and thank you, for the invitation to come and speak to you all today. We don't have any slides. We're just going to sort of chat to you about some of the collaborations that we've done, and hopefully give you a sense of maybe some of the strategies, tips, best practice for effective collaboration. So I guess just by way of introduction, so as Lillian said, I'm Gillian Terry. I'm an associate professor at LSE, and I'm one of the co-directors of LSE 100. By way of context, LSE 100 is LSE's flagship interdisciplinary course, and it's taken by all first-year undergraduate students at LSE. So it's a compulsory course. We typically have about 1,850 students registered on the module every year. So you can imagine at scale, thinking about embedding digital skills into a curriculum for that many students is somewhat of a challenge. Jenny, do you want to say something with DSL?
Sure. So the Digital Skills Lab was set up to enhance the digital skills of all staff and students across LSE. We aim to work to provide open workshops that any students can take part in, which covers everything from assistive technology, basic Excel, up through coding in Python, working with AI tools, SQL, and so on. And we also work closely with academics to help them think about how we might support their students to get the digital skills they need to complete their courses. And in some cases, as with Gillian and LSE 100, to embed the digital skills development as part of the academic course itself. So our goal in the DSL is to create digitally confident social scientists. And hopefully some of these examples will give you an idea of how we've done that.
Great, thanks, Jenny. Also, I guess by way of context, so LSE 100 and the Digital Skills Lab both sit in the same division at LSE, and that division is called Student Learning and Personal Development. We also benefit from sort of shared office space. So just thinking about things that have really enabled our effective collaboration. We'll talk about communication a little bit later. And I think one of the reasons why we've been able to collaborate so effectively has been that close contact that we have as part of the same division. So in the first part today, we're just going to tell you a little bit about our sort of history of different collaborations. And that goes back, as Lillian alluded to, for several years now. So I'll introduce the projects, and Jenny will give you a bit of a sense of what we did, and we can talk about sort of the outcomes and the goals that we were able to reach. So we've worked on sort of 4 key areas together in the last 6 years or so, starting with the embedding of Tableau data visualization skills as part of a module that we ran in LSE 100 on global food security. So we were interested in getting first-year undergraduate students to think about the issue of global food insecurity, and really to grapple with that question of all of the data that's out there, and how do we communicate about that data? How do we visualize that data? And so we approached the Digital Skills Lab about a collaboration to actually embed Tableau into the course itself. Jenny, maybe you can say a bit about what we did there.
Yeah, so the Digital Skills Lab, we're great at technology. We know nothing about food security. So this was a really interesting opportunity for us to get more involved in the academic side of what happens at LSE. We started by having several meetings with the teaching team to understand what their objectives were and to understand what they wanted the students to be able to do with these tools, so that we could identify what the learning outcomes would be, both from the digital skills side, but how what we did with the digital skills supported the learning outcomes of the course. Our contribution to this was to advise or to suggest some approaches that the teaching team could use to integrate technical exercises into the learning. And we shared our experience about how to do practical and experiential learning with the students, without the teachers having to stand at the front and point, click here, click there, and then move on. The other thing that I think we were able to contribute was working in technology. We had a lot more experience, perhaps negotiating with our technical services and also negotiating with the software providers. And so we were able to bring that to bear and to support the, for example, getting the licenses for the students, ensuring the teachers had access to licenses, and doing that kind of facilitation based on our previous experience.
And I think one of the main outcome or goal of this project was really that students felt like they were able to develop these data visualization skills as they progressed through their learning on LSE 100. So they were learning about global food insecurity, and then in seminars week to week, we would embed particular skills activities. So we would give students different data sets, and we would encourage them to build their data visualization skills, starting from sort of the very foundational ideas about, how do you upload a data set into Tableau, to the very technical and advanced. So one of our assessments was for students to actually produce a data story, which is essentially a sort of storyboarding tool that Tableau has as part of its software. And that was something that students then actually were assessed on, their abilities to communicate effectively using digital data visualization. And I think one of the goals, or one of the things that we've really appreciated about this project, was that students came back to us afterwards to say, actually, I was able to go into an internship interview or a job interview context and say that I had these skills in Tableau. And it wasn't because I had done a sort of webinar or some sort of online learning module. It was because it had been embedded into one of my courses. And I think for us that was a really valuable initial collaboration.
And I think that applied use of it within the context of their learning made it stickier. So it made it something that they could really build upon and use. I did see some of the students separately after that. I saw some of their visualizations and they were incredible. So I think that embedding that within the curriculum made it much more valuable learning for them.
I guess moving on to think, so that was way back in 2018. We actually did that collaboration. So the next collaboration that we did with the Digital Skills Lab was an AI module that we ran as part of LSE 100 beginning in 2019, and in fact is still running as part of the course. And the AI module asks the question, how can we control AI? So it's not a technical course. It's not a course that teaches students how to code or create machine learning models. It is a course that asks students to consider the political, economic, social, ethical impacts of AI technologies. But of course, when you get students who are interested in these technologies, many of those students actually did want the technical skills alongside. And so this was a slightly different kind of collaboration for us because we knew we weren't going to embed machine learning into LSE 100. That sort of doesn't fit with the level of sort of where students are, particularly in their first year of their degree. But we wanted to be able to signpost to the kinds of learning that sort of cohort of students might be interested in.
And so again, this started with a conversation about what the learning outcomes would be and what it is that we wanted the students to be able to achieve. And as Gillian has said, it wasn't to make them all AI engineers, but to allow those who wanted to learn more to learn more. What we ended up producing were a couple of Jupyter notebooks, which would allow the students to step through and understand how different aspects of AI that they were studying within the course actually worked. So we created some materials. They were put onto the LSE 100 Moodle site. Students could access them if they wanted to. They could very, in a very logical way, just step through and read and understand how the code worked, but they also had the opportunity to change some of the variables, or in some cases, upload their own videos to see whether or not the model could determine if it was a cat or a dog, and those sorts of things. Students were then signposted. If they wanted to take it further, they were signposted to courses where they could actually learn about the coding and take it further beyond just understanding how those models worked.
And I think the goal that was achieved, the outcome here was that students who had signed up to this course that was very much about the social science of AI were then able to extend their learning if they were interested. And I know that many of our students did end up then taking courses in R and Python and sort of going much further with it because they knew, well, I have the foundations of social science about, AI, but now I'm also going to have the more technical skills and aspects. So that's something we continue to do, and something that I think students really appreciate when they sign up for the AI theme of LSE 100. I'm conscious of time, I'll move quickly on to a more recent project that we collaborated on, and this was the introduction of Microsoft Sway to our assessment process. So we, in 2022, sort of redesigned our group project. So we have a group project on LSE 100 where students work in multidisciplinary teams. They have a sort of problem or a challenge that they're focused on, and then they propose sort of interdisciplinary solutions. And they have a target audience, and one of the outputs of that project is a digital report. So an engaging digital report that would be something that could convince or persuade stakeholders who have the power to make kinds of decisions. And Microsoft Sway was very new to me, very new to most of our teaching team as a potential option for students in creating that digital report. And so this is something where we actually went to the Digital Skills Lab very early on and said, what kinds of tools are available? What do you think undergraduate students would want to use to create a digital report that could be quite interactive? We had a sort of list of things we wanted students to be able to include, which, things like data visualizations and animation and video and links and all of the things that make a digital report quite interactive and engaging. And so that's something we brought to the Digital Skills Lab.
Yeah, and so one of my colleagues did a lot of consultation with the team and finally recommended Sway and put together a very short guide to how to use it, which was made available to students who also maybe weren't as familiar with it. And then as this was optional for the students, they didn't have to use it. We opened up a series of drop-in sessions for any students who wanted to come and understand more about how to use the tool or had specific questions.
And I think one of the great outcomes of this project has actually been that our students are now familiar with Microsoft Sway as a tool that's included in the Microsoft 365 universe that they have access to with their LSE credentials. And in the past year, we had over half of our groups using Microsoft Sway to create their reports. So by no means was it a requirement that students use this. They could still just sort of take, Microsoft Word or any other potential tool that they wanted. I mean, we had some students use Canva, things like that, but we wanted to give them something that was LSE supported, accessible for free, and something that students could really benefit from in terms of skills development. And so that was a huge success. And students again fed back that even just having the opportunity to learn how to use Microsoft Sway is something that I think has been really beneficial. Finally, and then we can sort of wrap up with some lessons learned, is a project that we worked on together beginning in 2023, which is a project on AI literacies. And so because LSE 100 has run this AI course since 2019, sort of pre-ChatGPT, pre the generative AI boom. Once generative AI sort of came on the scene in 2023, I think we realized very quickly that there was a need not just among first-year undergraduate students, but among the entire student and staff population at LSE to develop some literacies in generative AI. And so we sort of approached DSL, and Jenny and I had some initial conversations about what that might look like.
And I think probably a lot of people will identify with the fact that with generative AI, it touches on so many different parts of the university that it can sometimes end up feeling a bit stalled or a bit difficult to bring everything together. But we built on our experience of collaborating together and collaborating with others across the institution to try and bring together the expertise that already existed across the institution to put together a single self-paced module which students could dip in and out of in order to understand more about generative AI, to understand issues around the ethics, around risks and biases, or just to understand more about prompt engineering or how employers were using it. So we brought together colleagues from LSE 100 who did the bulk of the content, from our Data Science Institute who had been using generative AI in their teaching of programming, from the library to think about how it might be used in literature searching, from the LSE Careers Service to understand how employers were using it, and from our study skills team, LSE Life, to think about academic integrity and the implications of Gen AI in that. The role of the DSL was primarily one of bringing those people together and putting together a single project plan with, evaluation of impact and so on. The literacy module has been updated a couple times since then, because AI keeps advancing at quite a pace. But we've had quite a lot of engagement so far, and it's been one of our most successful collaborations across the school, with both professional services and academics involved.
Yeah, I think, one thing that the generative AI Moodle course sort of has shown us is that there's huge demand for both students and staff to engage with this. And we didn't want students to feel like, well, if I'm not taking the AI theme of LSE 100, I don't get a chance to think about and engage with these questions. And so for us, that was a hugely beneficial collaboration that actually took us outside of the LSE 100 course environment and into the broader school environment.
So I think we're gonna really quickly go through some of our tips and strategies. So I think the first thing is about making sure that the learning comes first. So understanding first why you want to embed it within the curriculum. It's not driven by the digital skills, it's driven by the curriculum and the needs of the teachers. And understanding then how those skills fit in. Are they compulsory or are they an optional thing? Is it an add-on to extend their learning, or is it an essential part of the learning? And all of those things then will determine what kind of a solution you put in place.
Yeah, I think from the sort of academic side, thinking about collaborating with a service like the Digital Skills Lab, one big thing is about the nature of the relationship itself. So for us, it's about co-creation and each partner, sort of us and the Digital Skills Lab, understanding what we were each bringing to the table. And both parties being really committed to the success of each particular project, not the sort of, we've ordered something very discrete from the Digital Skills Lab, you delivered it, and now we're done. We are in constant contact and communication throughout these projects to help evaluate their success, to refine the outputs, and to make sure that students are getting the most out of those digital skills. I think, you know, that speaks to the last point that I wanted to raise, which is around open conversation and lines of communication, making sure that there's a real common understanding. We very much have an iterative approach. So it's not a one size fits all or a sort of one-time discrete collaboration. It's very much something that we continue to collaborate on until, you know, we create something that we feel reaches the end goal that we're looking for. And I think
Yeah.
each academic year we spend time then going back and reflecting to say how we might do that better next time around.
And to know what those success metrics look like from both sides. So we both have something that we want to get out of this, making sure that those are aligned and that we are evaluating that return on investment. So was the thing that we produced or the engagement required from everyone, was it commensurate with what we expected to get out of it? And then making changes as needed and iterating as we go.
That's it from us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that was a real whirlwind tour, but I feel like it's really progressed from the original. I mean, the original theme blew my mind. This idea of this big question, and I'm going to paste. You know, three of our speakers, they've all created a question for the audience, but I'm going to selfishly paste my question in there, which is, if you had your way, and this can be as personal as you want, what big question would you hang digital skills introduction on at your institution? Mine would be food, without a doubt. Not food poverty, but whatever food culturally you want, whatever you want to kind of do it. But there are also a couple of questions. There's lots of questions from the audience, which I think Teresa will help to summarize. And I'm going to pop a couple of questions from our speakers to the audience in the chat as well, because I think, you know, it's lovely you've given us so much. It'd be lovely for you to get something back from the audience in terms of how they're responding to your presentations as well. Teresa, are you ready to go with some of the questions?
Yes, yeah,
as well?
absolutely. I'll
Jump in.
leave my camera off because I'm trying to hide from the sunshine, would you believe, at the end of October. So the first questions I want to share are from Mike, and they are for Fionn. So Fionn, can I pass these in your direction? You talked to us about your cohort and their experience, and Mike questioned whether that cohort would have had to, as part of their sort of nursing professional development, undertake any regular continual professional development that might include perhaps some digital skills along the way. Perhaps you could tell us that.
Yes, they would do mandatory training through their employer, which is online. Yes, but in terms of incorporating digital skills into their day-to-day life, I'm not sure, but the NHS isn't known for its high-tech equipment and resources and tools.
No, of course.
You have computers that take 10 minutes to come on, and you have maybe 2 computers for a whole ward that everybody's fighting for. So it's, although things are developing now, being digitally competent isn't really at the requirements for their job role. So when they come to us and they have to use computers all the time and they have to use different things, it's a big shock to some of them.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. That's lovely. And there was also a question from Mike, actually to both sets of authors, and that was the use of Copilot. Whether that was included in the sort of digital familiarization.
I can answer that from the LSE side. So in the initial AI module, which was in 2019, Copilot wasn't an option because it didn't exist yet, but it is definitely the tool that we recommend as part of the AI literacies. We do say that other tools exist, but due to all of the data privacy and security issues, and Copilot being the sponsored or the approved tool for the school, that is the one that we recommend while they do AI literacies. We've also since developed a workshop specifically around prompt engineering that focuses on the use of Copilot.
Great, thank you for that. So it's a developing picture, and I suspect it will be for Fionn as well in your context, that you know, these things are needs-based, and you're offering leadership as things change. Jenny and Gillian, if I can stick with you as well, there's a question here: is there a long-term review of assessments so that the skills get built on at later parts of the course?
So we are a half unit course, so we only have 2 assessments. So it's when I say course, I mean we run over just the students' first year. So we don't then sort of build on those skills further in, you know, subsequent years, although I would imagine that things like being able to use Sway is something that students can then take forward into other group projects that they do, or individual pieces of work that they do in later years. For us, Sway happens as part of the second assessment on LSE 100, so that's the second and final assessment. So we don't do any sort of building on that in any future assessments because the students are no longer with us.
Yeah,
Right.
that was my question, in fact, that I put in there. And I was thinking not so much Sway, because Sway's kind of quite limited in what it will do. It's a good tool, but it's got clear constraints. I was thinking more of things like Tableau, which are kind of incredibly open-ended tools that you can use in lots of different ways. Just whether or not a student would kind of do the assignment on that, begin to get real confidence, but then never come across it again, and so in a way you're not having any reinforcement of learning. But that sounds to me as if you're specifically looking at one module, maybe that would be other people needing to come on board and plan a longitudinal curriculum.
I think
Yeah,
there
so
are
that-
options for students to continue to develop or there were options for them to continue to develop their Tableau skills after the course. It was definitely something they did every week during the course, so they did get a lot of, you know, that it wasn't a one and done sort of situation. We had workshops that they could then go to continue to build on their skills, and there were opportunities throughout the university, such as data hackathons and things, where they could also apply it in different contexts.
Okay,
I think
thanks.
that is a good point, though, because I think, you know, when we heard back from students about their experiences with Tableau, one of the things they said was that they then used Tableau in an internship context just a few months later. They had spent the whole year learning it with us, and then they went into an employer context and were given access to, you know, commercial Tableau there, and were building on the skills. So hopefully there's some sort of through line there to careers as well.
I think
So
it's
that's
important to remember as well that just because we can, it doesn't mean that we should. So you know, all these tools, they should be, you know, is this going to benefit the students? And it's going to be different for each student, it's for each cohort, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that kind of connects as well with this final question for Jenny and Gillian, which is, what is the link with other maybe service areas within the university, such as library services and careers services, etc.? Are they aware of what you're doing, and does it join up?
Yes, I think this question might be in relation to the generative AI Moodle course, because I think Jenny was mentioning there that we linked up with other parts of the school. So for example, with the library, the big chunk of content that they provided to our generative AI literacies course was really about academic integrity, issues relating to copyright, intellectual property, you know, the kinds of things that university librarians are very, very well versed in. So using their expertise there. Regarding careers, it was much more so about using generative AI in your career search, using it to help build your sort of job documents, and also how you might be asked to use generative AI in sort of internship applications. LSE students are very sort of internship and employer, you know, job minded from the very beginning. And so we get a lot of questions from students about, you know, how do I make sure I'm well prepared for my internship assessment center, where I might be asked to use generative AI tools. So it was more so about that side of thing, or the links.
I'd also say that as we're a centralized service and we kind of go across the entire university, we keep in touch quite closely with the careers team and with the library, the study skills teams, to look for those opportunities where digital skills are part of what they are doing. And with academic departments, we may engage with an academic department for an academic reason, and then they will request a more career-focused or an extracurricular opportunity for their students. So for example, we have engaged with the accounting department to do a extra thing called Python for Accounting, which is about how does Python get used in the accounting industry. It's an optional thing for the students, not part of their curriculum, but it links through then to their career aspirations and thinking about their internships and jobs.
Thank you so much for your very full and helpful answers to those questions. And thank you, Mike, and others who've asked them on the way. There's still a very lively chat going on in the chat pane as well. So please do take a look. And of course, all of this will be saved as a resource within our Xerti, so people can come back and take a look.
Teresa,
and sorry, I was just going to mention as well that I do issue on behalf of Future Teacher at the end of the session digital badges that will be coming your way. So thank you very much to our presenters, and including your student Fionn who participated. Do look out for those in recognition and gratitude for how you've contributed. So thank you very much.
I'm selfishly going to ask a question directed at Fionn, but it could be relevant to Gillian and Jenny as well, which was really, my university's got a course on Future Learn that any student could join to learn about inclusive learning, which is great because they can do it before they join the uni. And then we have a set of web pages which introduces students to higher education style of learning, which again is open, so it could be accessed by anybody. Do you have a gut feeling or any experience about which is better, a course that has kind of the sense of time and completion versus a set of web pages that are quite open-ended, you dip in and out? Any thoughts on that?
Well, we did think initially about putting the resources on a web page to make it look a bit more appealing, more professional, if you like, than what Blackboard can offer. But the purpose of putting it on the TDM site is because it mimics Blackboard. And so they get used to using Blackboard, what it looks like, how to access it, how to find resources within it. So just by completing that course on the TDM, they're already, they've taken the fear out of using Blackboard once they start their course. And the other thing with the course is that they do get a little certificate at the end, and everybody loves the certificates, don't they, to put somewhere. So once they've gone through everything, they are able to print out certificates to show that they have completed everything on the course.
Any thoughts on that, Gillian and Jenny, before we move to Alistair?
LSE does have a Moodle course for first years called Prepare to Learn at LSE, which does include some information about systems and technologies, in addition to other aspects of being a student. My personal take on it is that such a course is useful for a certain number of students, but that they get so much information at the start of the year and so much that they're supposed to learn and do and understand that a lot of it wouldn't stick. I'm much more in favor of, I think Fionn mentioned this about that sort of building the digital skills into the other things that they're doing at the time that they're going to use them. That is more difficult. But it can be done, and I think having, in that case, good references, good websites, and that are easy to find at the point when you need them is a more effective solution.
Brill. Oh, thank you very much for that insight. Over to Alistair.
Yeah, so in fact, I was picking up on Fionn's question, to everyone, how do you prepare non-traditional students for postgraduate? I know Patricia commented how she's got pre-arrival programs that have been successful, and C.E. Norris, sorry, I didn't see what the forename was, but also talked about the Bloomsbury Learning Exchange. I was just wondering if a couple of our audience might be able to say what they do, maybe Patricia or C.E. Norris.
Yeah, I'm happy to say
Yep.
something about the Bloomsbury Learning Exchange. So that's something that's for a few institutions that are based in the London area, mostly around Bloomsbury, but we do have a couple of institutions that are slightly further away. And we share resources. It started off as a shared Moodle service, and then it went from there. So there's all sorts of areas that we collaborate on now. I wouldn't like to try and list all the institutions that are involved, but it's things like the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, Birkbeck, UCL, which I'm part of, the Royal Veterinary College, City University, that's the one, City and St George's, pardon me, City St George's, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, it's changed, hasn't it? Yeah.
Which is not Bloomsbury exactly. And I forget all the other ones, so they'll probably be very disappointed in me if they're listening to this. But yeah, there's a few of us now.
Now, at what stage do the students get access? Is this pre-admission?
Yeah, so the Digital Skills Awareness course was created by the BLE, and then people copy and paste it into their own Moodle, basically, and then tailor it to their own institutions. They refer to their own guidance and courses and things. And it's available, I think for most people, it's available once you start at the institution, once you have access to Moodle, at whatever point that is. But certainly for us, that's how it works. And it's really sort of signposting what sort of digital skills the student would need. They also got a MOOC on Future Learn, I think, that also covers a lot of that sort of preparation. It sounds similar to LSE's Prepare to Learn, that sort of idea.
Okay, that's very helpful. But it sounds like until a student's registered and got access to Moodle, they wouldn't do it, because it feels that that's the sticking point for some organisations. How do you get to the student before they arrive? Yeah,
and something like the MOOC would probably really help with that, wouldn't it? So I guess it's something that's not outside of your institution, but then of course it's not tailored. So that is a tricky one, isn't it?
Okay, that's helpful. Patricia, I don't know if Patricia's still on the webinar, but do your students get access beforehand?
I don't think Patricia's with us now.
Okay, that's
She may have left. We've got 2 minutes left, and there are some things we want to be able to communicate to our audience. And so yes, we've kind of said thank you and reminded you that you get your digital badge in the light of, you know, the fact that we're talking about digital skills as well. Thank you very much. And I think Ron wants to make mention of the Xerte conference coming up, and we want to make mention of our next webinar as well. So over to Ron. Are you on mute, Ron?
Or are you signing?
Sorry about that.
That's it, you're here.
Hopefully you're seeing my screen,
Yep.
the FT page.
It's all good, yeah.
Had that open, if you refresh it or if you revisit the link, you'll now find further down the page the registration form to our next session in November, so you can register that. There's info there about our expression of interest form, so if anyone's interested and inspired by our excellent guest speakers today and want to share what you're doing with Rich Media, then there's a form there, or any of the future sessions that we're going to be doing. So we're always interested to hear from new guest speakers. We have a what next panel on below today's session. A reminder that we have a mailing list and or a LinkedIn group that you can join. We encourage you to register for the next webinar. Look at the schedule for our Reborn sessions, and if there are future sessions, then sign up for those. And what we do ask everybody to do before you just quickly sign off is in the text chat, obviously say thank you to our guest speakers today, but also mention what one specific thing you might do as a result of what you've seen and heard today. I'll stop my screen sharing and I'll put the link to that page in the text chat.
Okay, brilliant. And I'm already thinking, it's like, as things progress, have you already got ideas in the pipeline, Jenny and Gillian, about like the next wave of stuff in terms of skill sets that students might, something that might draw the students in and entice them to work on your digital skills program?
Yeah, I think that's always the question, isn't it? How do we keep up, and how do we make sure that we're preparing students for sort of the things that they will then need once they get out in the world after university?
Okay. Right. I'm tempted to say I'm going to stop the recording here.